Good afternoon. I hope everyone had a very nice lunch and are ready for another inspiring talk. I just want to let you know during the presentation you can interact with us via the chat option. And if you are facing any kind of technical difficulties, just reach out and we'll do our best to solve them. Just make sure that you put the chat on panelists and attendees so you are capable of interacting and also chat with each other. And at the end of the talk, we'll have some time for questions. Those questions you can list in the Q&A option. So that way we can make sure that we answer all your questions. And then let's get on to our next speaker. I just practiced his last name, so let me get this right. John Belanger. He is the principal designer and head. Yeah, was that good? He's the principal designer and head of design systems at Booking.com. And he has been building experience architecture for 20 years. So needless to say that we can learn a lot from him. And luckily for us, I just heard him say that he has a lot of material. So I hope you are energized and excited for our next talk, Design Systems on the Factory Floor, on how to improve the foundations we build on, the processes we nurture, and the experience we design. So John, we're all yours.
Thank you, Zoe. John Berger, Ways of Seeing is one of my favorite books and a great introductory and philosophical text on reading culture through the frame of painting and photography. And this quote inspires me. The relationship between what we see and what we know is never settled. And it's about the change, the way that what we look at changes what we see changes what we look at, that there's a dialectical relationship between the subject and the object. And I think that's a little bit of what this talk about a design system wants to focus on, is maybe change your perception of this term just a little bit, that I think we take for granted, those of us working in the digital product space. I want to maybe unpack it a little bit and show that there might be a different way of looking at it. I'm John. Zoe just said that. Nice to meet you. I was a young futurist in the UCLA Film School when I said this 25 years ago. I was certain that the internet could never replace the CD-ROM. I mean, look at the quality of the video, the interactivity, the data storage. Obviously, that didn't pan out as well as I wanted it to. And so nonetheless, Apple hired me in my first programming job, and I made management systems there for the engineering group. And that was an incredible view of building products, integrating software, wrote time tracking systems and test case management. And I had a big influence on Steve Jobs. You can see in 1997, that's a picture of him the same year. That's me in my office at Apple, and Steve coming back. But I'm not going to go through my entire career. I've spent 20 plus years leading teams of designers, product managers, and developers, designing, architecting, implementing, and supporting large-scale systems. I've especially knowledge management, communities, and a few .coms. I like big, hairy informational problems and knowledge management focused problems. And I think I'm going to show that design systems have a kind of knowledge management challenge. I promised you a factory. When you see this logo, I'm sure you think of Booking.com, a leader in travel all over the world. And it's really what I think of as the travel factory. That's the factory in the story. It's the #1 travel platform in the world. It's grown tremendously. It's available in 200 countries or more, really. 43 languages. We localize to all of them. And it's just grown phenomenally. I don't think people are aware of just how big a company Booking is. 15 billion in revenue in 2019. And that phenomenal growth in 10 years was fueled by experimentation in large part. Experimentation and advertising. Major spend with Google, billions of dollars a year, the biggest ad spend in our market space, but then we also experiment to optimize that. And so at any one time, there's, I can't even really say the word, non-gatillion versions of the site active, because we're running 1,000 to 2,000 experiments simultaneously at any one time. And those all create permutations of our experience. It means there isn't any just one experience at Booking. It's a really diverse, somewhat unpredictable set of experiences. And that experimentation was a large part how we optimized our revenue. That's great. It's been a big growing story, but there's been some challenges in the last few years. Traffic is shifting to mobile. I don't think I have to tell you that mobile phones are important. That's not even almost worth mentioning. But in 2018 for us, over 50% of our website traffic was generated through mobile phones, and bookings are shifting there. And it's not just the same transaction in a new device, but the behavior is quite different. People book a little closer to their stay windows. They behave differently on their phones, and the way they research is different. So we have to support a different interaction model. Your trip can be one of the biggest purchases. Besides a house and a car, trips are one of the biggest purchases people make, and they make them yearly. And so that's a complex research task. And we're feeling a lot of pressure from Corona. If you follow the news, our business plunged almost to nothing in the second quarter. It's come back quite a bit, but we know that travel is going to be challenged for the next few years, and that creates additional pressure on our business. And that softening revenue, softening traffic, changes the dynamics of how we get our traffic, and we can't just depend on Google anymore. And they, of course, tend to push their way into travel. You'll see their results in search just as often as you'll see ours. So there's a lot of pressure on what we've done. And so, of course, what got us here won't get us there. Almost everybody that's traveling and using online systems is traveling with us for hotels. But we have built that revenue stream on accommodation, and now we want to diversify in our portfolio to include flights and taxis and rental cars, and to bring all of that on multiple devices. So we've got to grow our product line and change the dynamics of how we capture audience. And then we have another challenge, which is internally, we're complex. We've grown so fast, we have hundreds of product teams building on web, mobile web, on 2 app platforms for email, for chatbots, both to book and to support our accommodations and other travel products. And then all of that is available in 200 countries and 43 languages. And I mentioned the countries because those all represent different regulatory frameworks, different policies. It can really make for a challenging environment. Now, I could just end the story and say we started a design system and everything was solved. But I think what I'd like to do is take us back in time a little bit and look at the roots of design systems. They were born well before the digital. And in fact, any good story about design systems should start with A4 paper. So A4 paper goes back actually a couple hundred years. Really, paper is based on about how big somebody can stretch their arms out, and then that determined a lot of dynamics in terms of the A-size paper. It can be folded in half. Anytime you fold it in half, you get the next size. When you fold A0 in half, you get A1, A1 in half, you get A2, A2 in half, you get A3, and so on. And that's really how that paper sizing works. It starts with a meter square, and it uses a ratio called the magic aspect ratio that allows these rectangles to maintain. It's not the golden ratio, it's the magic aspect ratio. And of course, in part, that human factor of how big a paper is and how useful our field of view is at a certain distance and what we feel comfortable with then influence the way we built machinery. And there were a number of innovations from 1900 to about 1920, there was screen printing, got patented and made industrial high-speed screen printing, lithography, offset lithographic presses, 1900, I think, sorry, I've got this here. 1903 is the lithographic press, 1907 is the patent of silk screening. 1922 is the first time the term graphic designer is coined and used in literature. So this is all in the last 100 years. And around that same time, 1917, Piet Mondrian was focusing on planar graphics, on working abstractly with space and with color. And those experiments were highly influential throughout Europe. The war had just ended. People were intermixing around and traveling around Europe for the first time in years. And there was a rejuvenation and kind of renaissance in graphic design. But I want to line it up, and going back to my original quote, there's this interplay between the technology and the designers. Mondrian was looking at painting, but also at typography, and had a big influence on Walter Gropius and the formation of the Bauhaus a couple of years later. I think some of these things just spring up simultaneously, but of course, they did influence each other. And Gropius began a school that eventually moved to Dessau and has, I think, many of the modern underpinnings of design that we are still using today. They formalized type. There was a focus on mixed media. There was a focus on mechanical means of production and creating objects through both artisanal hand-wrought forms, but also machine-based forms. One of the teachers there, Johannes Itten, really was provided kind of watershed foundational work in the elements of color that helped to codify color systems and really color theory. He had a student, Joseph Albers. Albers' wife also was in the school at Bauhaus. I think the women are not often mentioned for their work. Gropius really, I think, marginalized a lot of them, said that the men think in 3 dimensions and women in 2. And so in many ways, it's time to look at their work because, as you can see, their textile work, Annie Albers' work and others, graphically beautiful, and I think reminds us very much of the sort of modern use of space and color that we've become accustomed to in the last 100 years. Sorry, I just lost my notes a little bit. Herbert Bayer and the Universal Alphabet about 1925 began to imagine type in terms of its more streamlined and artistic forms, began to use bolder colors and to use type as a graphical element. And this eventually filtered down over the course of about 20 years. I'm going to jump a few steps into what became known in the 50s as the Swiss style. And this really formalized the use of negative space, of the grid for partitioning and guiding the eye over a set of graphics, and led to a number of dynamics that are still very much used today in aesthetics. You know, we see Armin Hoffman's work laying type over black and white photography, or Joseph Müller-Brockmann, who is using the grid-based system in the center for poster layout and using type again as a graphical element. And Helvetica, I think, maybe one of the most famous kinds of outputs from the Swiss style, 1957 by Max Menninger. Also Universe and Avenir came out of the same movement. So many of the typefaces that we use today and are popular in design, I think these still look, actually, you could see these on any modern website today. I think this kind of design is still guides a lot of what we do. And there was that relationship to machinery. They were producing work so that it could be mass produced as posters. So they had to understand the printing press. And in the next 10 years after Helvetica was the advent of phototypesetting using the first Unix machines around 1968. These used markup language. Markup language allowed the designs to be abstracted from the actual digitized and abstracted so that we could describe them on the computer and manipulate them. And those markup languages that were TROF and SGML and eventually became HTML really are the same way we're working today. So the point is that we're talking about design systems are really treating an analog problem in a digital world. These previous design systems, this was school, basically a grid system, the use of type, the use of markup languages. These are all really important influences that actually, surprisingly, have not changed too much in about 50 years. So let's jump 50 years and talk a little bit about the implementation of design systems. When I first started on the web, there were no design systems. Consistency was mostly done by careful designers and without documentation. But in the 2000 to 2010, really you could describe a brand using a PDF. And it was a way for designers and brand marketers to keep tabs on the use of assets, on the consistency of type, color, and line. Mostly it was a way of describing look and feel. Sometimes these style guides made their way to developers the later we got in time. And we called them web style guides because that's what there was, the web. But bringing Steve Jobs back a second time, so that's a gratuitous mention. The advent of mobile apps changed this because you had a design process, you had a development process, but this time you're creating executable files in a build process, a little bit different than the way the web was built at that time. So it was different, and we really couldn't call them web style guides anymore. They became design style guides, and that period lasted not even 5 years, but still was basically an offline form of documentation to try to keep tabs of all the different aesthetic design elements. But in a parallel track came Bootstrap from Twitter, Zurb Foundation, frameworks for building and scaling out websites quickly, even to give design tools to the hands of developers. And of course, no design systems talk can go without mentioning Brad Frost and the atomic design system, one of the most influential ideas, I think, and important ideas. And I think when you think of it alongside frameworks like Bootstrap, you're really talking about design moving closer and closer to the apparatus. We're getting closer to the printing press. And in our case, it's code. And we start to call them design systems. Booking really started a design system along a similar journey from style guide, in some sense, to design system. And our first design system treated a stylistic problem. By 2017, with all that massive growth, and that's why I told you about it, we grew in teams. We grew from tens of designers to hundreds of designers, from hundreds of developers to thousands of developers. The company exploded. And so did, while we were doing all that experimentation, the number of colors on our website. Our brand had 3,500 colors in its UI in 2017. And so we went on the booking diet. But today our focus is on cross-platform consistency and reusable front-end services. So I want to show you something about that. I think a lot of you know what a design system looks like, so I'm going to go through this pretty fast. But I wanted you to see the basics And I really think it's beautiful work that the team has done. So if you know atomic design, I don't think I'm going to tell you anything new. Our design system is made up of foundations and atomic components and tooling to support it. Our foundations are colors. You can see here, this is our new palette. And this palette is functional in nature and it's hue locked. So basically we hold the hues the same, we change the saturation and brightness. And we think that it provides a lot of options, but a limited palette and a lot of brand compliance so that we get a best of both worlds type of color palette. And I'm going to tell you a little something more about it down the line. Spacing is proportional in our design system, and that means that as we change screen size, so does the spacing as the way it's expressed in code, and it is separated. We are abstracting the way we define these foundations as tokens. I won't say too much about tokens, but tokens are the layer of abstraction in code that allow us to have a flexible design system. So part of space we think of as surfaces too. Surfaces become very important in the way we think of something like dark mode that you use now in apps and even on your desktop. But the elevations separate the layers of the interface. And we even like to think about the distance of separation because that affects the way that shadows appear. So surfaces and spacing are a core aspect of our foundations as well. And then of course, typography. Our typography is in 3 ramps, and those 3 ramps, different sizes for different screens, means that display 1 on a desktop computer and display 1 on a handheld device have the same name, but they have different sizes, which means that as screens resize responsively, we get fluidity from our text, but using the same code properties. And then we have our atomic components. And we don't use atoms, molecules, and organisms. We focus on elements, which are the most reduced, smallest units, a button, an avatar, a badge. These get built up and thrown into containers, basically the bounding boxes that hold elements, and then multiple containers and elements form into patterns, in this case, a card with action buttons. And we want to make the system accessible. And it's part of our mission statement in the company. This is actually just an excerpt out of our company mission that we promise access for everybody to all of life's experiences whenever, wherever, and however it's best, however it best suits them. Accessibility is something we value and we design in. I want to come back to the color and just point out one small aspect of this, of how we think through accessibility, which is the palette itself is accessible. Based on contrast, you'll notice that some of the lettering floating on the color swatches are white, some are dark. And that's all programmatic. It's algorithmically determined based on contrast. And so we build that right into the palette and we ensure that text always is accessible on top of its colored background. That fluid text also means that any assistive technologies that change text sizes, or when users need to change screen sizes, we're always providing fluid text with the right size. And we support, of course, screen reader assistive technology. We build that into our componentry. So there's ARIA tags inside of our components that make them essentially, when we hand them over to developers, they've already got the stubs of what they need in there. And we make all of this available through a design API that actually transmits code to build iOS libraries, Android libraries, web, React, Vue, for email. We actually fill up our Figma libraries from code from the design API as well. And so we really like to look at code as a source of truth. And because we focus so much on code driving what we do instead of a graphical definition, like the style guides of yesterday being 2010, it makes switching from light to dark mode, both in design and in development, a lot easier. And we can support theming, which means that we can dress a UI in different brands really pretty flexibly. And that's something that we have spent 2020 working on. The team's done a fantastic job on it, I have to say. And then tooling. We offer, when I'm talking about tooling, I'm not talking about designing in Figma or coding in your favorite IDE. I'm talking about some of the proprietary tools that we've built for designers and developers. And that includes, by the way, Figma plugins, a documentation markup-based tool that, in fact, was the basis. We built the tool that the thing I'm about to show you was based on. This is our designer documentation. It's essentially stylistic and breaks down, for instance, a calendar into its constituent parts. It provides links to developer documentation, to shows the anatomy, breaks it apart, all the different piece parts of a calendar and the behavior, best practices, the accessibility documentation. Many of our components have, short animations that show how they get used in context, and we're really proud of that. And on the developer side, we have a very similar tool set, but it's all based on library code. And I want to show that to you right now. I'm going to show you both calendar. So this is the environment Foundry, which is our component viewer, component discoverability. It's how we manage components in our libraries. I think this is the view I like to show, which is it's the playground where we can change the screen sizes and look at it in the context of a browser or a mobile device. And we can actually, these are editable properties. So if you'll watch the names of the days, for instance, on top, I can type in and say, hi interact, and Monday became interact. And then that, I'm actually live editing the code, which I don't seem to be able to grab here. There you go. Down here, which of course can just grab that code using a copy button, and it'll reflect even the changes I made if I wanted to. Usually that data is going to be live linked to backend, but this playground is a great place for developers to start. Generally shows multiple examples of the calendar or whatever component there is in context. We provide technical documentation, essentially what are the properties, and then even an embedded Figma version of the calendar itself. Let me just go back into full screen mode. So we like to look at code as a source of truth, not SVG. I said that a little earlier. And our consistency isn't just visual, it's semantic. It's within the way we name the properties. We consistently name the properties between the web and app as well, so that we try to maintain those properties so the system is usable to developer audiences. And that is to fulfill this ambition, right? That people can work faster, that it's a high-speed assembly line that maintains quality and aligns designers and developers into a very tight relationship between what we specify and what we build. But there's always a wrinkle to this. I mean, we run into the iron triangle of good, fast, cheap. The old adage is you can only pick two, good and cheap, fast and cheap, fast and good, but not cheap. But of course, our aspiration is that we want all three. That's really what we're looking for. So let's look a little bit at how we build. Now, I'm going to make this look a little bit like a waterfall. We're an agile company, and I think probably those of you who aren't at Booking are too. So I'm going to show you a waterfall. It's not really meant to be a waterfall. It's more to talk about translation. So typically, here's 4 people involved in the interaction of digital products. There's an internal audience. That's what the brackets are for, a PM, a designer, developer. There's also researchers, copy people. I would put them in the design bucket. Designers are not just people making boxes and arrows, but UX writers play a heavy influential role on the quality of design. So I'm just simplifying it here. I hope you don't feel left out if you're in one of those other roles. And so PMs write stories. They translate customer needs into stories, and they tell designers these are the stories, who then create visuals of some sort. It could be wireframes, it could be high fidelity graphics, also specification. It's visual specification. That's generally what a designer is doing. I'm way oversimplifying what a designer does, and we are not just boxes and arrows. Thank you. We transmit that, we translate that visual set of visuals to a developer, who then in some very real sense transmits that as code, all of the previous translations, to the customer, who reads it as a user interface. And then they give us cryptic proxies back of clicks and revenue, and sometimes we actually talk to them. It's interesting though, there's very little process feedback. So we see the effect on the customer, and that's awesome. That should drive what we do. But if there's a failure, and if we don't meet the customer need, was it the story? Was it the interpretation of the designer? Was it the set of coding decisions, or maybe even something deeper at the platform level? We have a very hard time getting to those root causes. And in fact, we don't say root cause very often. We tend to generate lots of versions of our product and then use clicks and revenue and CSAT as proxy indicators as to whether we got it right. But it gets very complicated. This sort of cycle of Babel gets compounded by more than 150 teams, more than 4 platforms, and then all of those policy regulations and localization variability that gets dialed into the process. It's really complicated. And so I think we need to look more broadly at just how we're building and not just what we're building. For the most part, we're a set of boxes that hand things between each other. And I'd say that as we want to get out of that tunnel vision and move towards systems thinking, we might look at Klaus Schwab's 4 stages of the Industrial Revolution. He's a thinker and writer involved in the World Economic Forum. And I will go over this very quickly. Oh, and I put a slide out of order, kids, I'm sorry. We'll come back to this. I guess no design presentation. I'm sorry, I just found out I put something out of order. No design presentation is complete without reference to Steve Jobs and maybe the faster horse meme. And I'll come back to cars and building. But the first industrial revolution, this is Schwab's 4 industrial revolutions, was mechanization and steam power. And the second was mass production and electrification. We, in essence, have covered this time. This is about 1920, this photo. And that's where we entered this story with the style and the revolution in printing that occurred at the beginning of the last century. The third industrial revolution, digitization and automation. And the fourth is really what we're seeing now, the cyber physical systems, where the line between biology and electromechanism is really getting dissolved, and people are working much more closely with robotics. The irony is that while we create software and digital apps and can put magic on a handset phone, the way we're working looks more like an artisanal process, an apprenticed process, like before the printing presses were mechanized. And I think we have to look ourselves in the mirror a little bit. We use Slack, we talk faster, but we might be guilty of a faster horse. We might be using a faster horse to drive the way we're building things. Henry Ford was supposed to be right here. So we could look to the car industry. That's what I would recommend. One of the industries that we can watch go through actually all 4 of those stages. I mean, Elon Musk is building a factory right now that may not have people in it, his next gigafactory for the Type Y. And in the 70s, we all know about the advent of robots in the car industry. The first ones really started welding in about 1971, although the first robots, really industrial robots, about 1961, that were prototypes for building cars. And from the 70s, we get the concept of design for X or design for excellence, which is a body of thought around, also known as DFX. Design for assembly, design for manufacture, design for performance, design for serviceability, design for conformance. There's about 10 or 12 DFXs, all of them, most of them coming directly, originating in the car industry, some of them in the military industrial complex. But these are processes of thinking about the design of design for the purpose of making higher quality goods with process-oriented feedback. And so my thought bubble for this talk is we have to think a little bit about design for development. Maybe we'll call it something else. That's my go-in position, design for development in the development process, so that we can build a better service that helps us to bridge those audiences that need to build digital systems and provide meaningful feedback so that we can create more scaled, less artisanal, less hand-wrought experiences. So what we've done in our design systems team is we're beginning to measure the number of insertions and deletions in CSS and JavaScript, and that's what's represented here. And they're going down over time since July. As we build more and more components and distribute through a design API, libraries that we've built for each platform, we are starting to see, now this is web focused, but we'll see similarly on iOS and Android, that there's less custom code going into, less handwritten custom code going into our code bases. This is almost the opposite graph. It is the increase in the use of our design system class files in the same touch points. And you can see the insertions are going up. So they're essentially inversely and directly related. On a next horizon, what we're beginning to focus on now is building out essentially the designer and developer journey. We're looking at them as our ethnographic audience and looking at the pain points and beginning to decode where we can provide better internal support to those users. So we're thinking of how we can not only impact the level of custom code that people are writing, but provide better service to them as they do it so that they have less pain along the way. And then on a future horizon, and this is really meant to represent that a UI sits on data, in essence. That's just foo code coming out of, say, a SQL database in the back end. But our intention is to add an analytical layer so that the components themselves are instrumented at a layer, at a level where we get process feedback, we get usage feedback, and we can find and address the components for updating. Right now, that's also done on a relatively manual basis, team by team by team. So what analytics self-aware components should let us do is begin to think about our entry points and interactions in a much more systematic way, where our design system and our platforms can work in unison to provide a kind of static analysis of all the different touch points. We can know what kind of version of the system they're on. We can understand how well they're performing with users. We can understand how well they're performing physically in terms of their latency and speed. And we can find them and we can update them and address them directly. So that's really everything I wanted to cover. It's a lot of information, a long journey. Let me hit you with a couple of the notes, which is incredible complexity of booking and the number of people involved in the design process have made a design system a necessity. That design system is a service. That's how we build it. A service made of people who provide consultation and technology that provides libraries. We keep it accessible, and we are looking to greatly expand the level of automation and feedback that we get in order to produce a higher quality product at a lower cost that really pleases our customers and delights our developers and designers and keeps them in that dialogue with technology that allows them to build things that make people happy. And thanks a lot. And I'll take some questions.
Thank you, John. That was an amazing presentation.
Thank you.
So hopefully there are any questions. I think you just overwhelmed everyone. Let's see.
That literally went, in history and around the world, and touched on a lot of topics.
Definitely.
I don't see any Q&A. I don't know where I'm supposed to look, Zoe.
No, I'm looking at Q&A. There are no questions there. Well, then I will ask you a personal question. We talked about it a little bit during your presentation as well in regards to accessibility. Obviously with the lockdown happening and a lot more people moving digitally, I mean, Booking.com has always been a digital platform, but how did that change the way you integrated that on your platform? Was there a shift? Was it accelerated, or?
It's actually very unique to, there's actually a very specific answer to it, which was coming out of 2019, we actually been working on kind of remediating a number of problems that we had. We had a number of compliance violations in terms of accessibility in our accommodations experience. And we spent about 2 years closing over 1,000 bugs.
Wow. And
as we transitioned into 2020, that load was off. That project was done. The team did an amazing job and delivered. And so that was when we initiated in January a focus on design system components. And I would say what COVID actually did was it's more of a personal, it's a human story, which is as we were launching and getting that off the ground, we all had to go home and we had to get on the phone on video calls and find a way of working between our accessibility function and our design system team so that we could have a workflow that worked between the two teams. And I'll be honest, it's worked pretty well. We've got room to improve it, and it's still been mostly web focused. And so 2021 sees us focusing on mobile apps. Okay,
interesting. And I see there are actually questions coming in, so we had a nice kickoff. A question by Iwere Owaka. How do you integrate new technology or innovation into your code base?
Wow. Design systems lag in some ways, right? But I can provide a compelling example where we lead. And a lot of times that's almost rogue behavior, I'll tell you. But often, the real answer is often we're lagging because the design system represents, it's expensive to build libraries. And so we tend to be following what are the standards that teams are using and ensuring that we're providing libraries in the languages that they prefer. So there has to be a bit of a critical mass of usage of a certain technology before we're willing to invest in moving the design system in a new direction. But I'll give an example. Swift UI, just in the last few months, has really started to come in and take us by storm, but almost at a grassroots, bottoms up sort of way where teams started using it individually. And but really the base of our iOS code was in Objective-C. One of our lead developer, basically, nights and weekends type of project, came up with a Swift UI library for BUI, the booking user interface, and took it beta and got teams to adopt it. And so recognized it, sort of felt it in the wind, innovated, and now we're filling in behind that library with actual full support and documentation for that set. So I can't tell you that that's the way it's going to work every time. What we do is we are in constant discussion and dialogue with development teams and looking for any trends that are starting to take hold in the company, and then discussing constantly within our team rituals as to whether there's a new technology we need to support.
Awesome. Okay, the questions are coming in now, so hopefully you're ready. And the next one is customer behavior and type of personality. Is that coming into your design?
Customer behavior and
type of personality.
Well, yes. I think customer behavior comes into the design system consistently through experimentation. We have a culture of experimentation that when we release something, when we make a major change, whether it's in the system or a team is customizing a piece of code or one of our existing components, our design system is not a control system. We don't force people to use it a certain way. It's meant to enable creativity, not limit it. And so teams are constantly pushing the limit of what our design system can do, taking that to customers, dropping it into experiments. If customers respond, usually through the form of those proxy clicks or bookings, we get a signal that says this is a good change, and that can drive permanent change back into the design system. So experimentation is probably the easiest answer there, and of course usability testing as well.
Okay. And question by Anonymous. How can we convince teams that are afraid that the design system will take away their creativity?
Well, Anonymous, always asking those hard questions. But I kind of covered that one. I think it's a culture that we build, and I can't take credit for the design system culture at Booking in many ways. There's about 15 people, a little bit more between accessibility and design systems that I think have evangelist zeal. They engage the community. They're the most active people in developer communities and in designer communities. And we're all very clear and coaching each other that our tools are for enabling teams' productivity, quality, speed, and creative choice, and not about limiting. And of course, we carry a brand flag. It's not the Wild West. We want people working within a framework, but really we're there to service our community.
Excellent. A question by Christian. How valuable is for a product designer to have not only UX, UI experience? Oh, sorry, now the chat is moving away because more questions are coming in. Okay, I go again. How valuable is for a product designer to have not only UX, UI skills, but also both business and coding skills? Does this provide him or her a bird's eye view for better product management and understanding?
Yes. If you'll have me back another time, I'll give you a talk. I collect slides, I collect images of UX designers trying to explain what they do to other people. They're all infographics like, concentric circles or, different ways of visualizing the multidisciplinary aspects of UX. And I think it's funny how many ways there are to talk about that. Yes, of course, product management skills are incredibly important. I think if you're a service-oriented designer, understanding the life cycle of products is critical to the design process. Code, I think, is more controversial. I think you have to understand how code works. You have to understand the basics, and it's never going to hurt you to know code. I'm not a coder. I coded 20 years ago. When the coding got tough, I got into management. But I've been able to manage engineers, product managers, and designers because I'm a generalist and know enough of the language and have empathy for those audiences and those skill sets. And I think that helps me. So of course that's good. I would also throw in business analysis, I think it's incredibly important to understand the balance sheet, to understand essentially what are the objects of value in your company. Is it an order? Is it a customer record? Is it a license? Understand the big flows of data through back-end systems, understand how value is produced. I think that's as critical.
Okay, then a question by Thomas M. Well, first of all, he's saying, hi, John, great presentation. Regarding changing your product that is complex and built a lot of different ways, platforms, optimizations, which you mentioned. How did you help business stakeholders focus on budget or ROI, understand the cost of change, and ultimately get them on board to support your newer components?
Wow. Well, I guess we have a good topic.
No,
we'll have a good topic in our one-on-one, Thomas, and I know Thomas well. So it's tough. I don't want to give a kind of a simple answer, and I don't want to talk your ear off. Here's the thing. Hard to talk about ROI when if you don't measure velocity or quality or end user experience quality. So I think we have to talk about what are the measures we need in place to have a decent ROI discussion. Although we have anecdotal information that, as I showed in graphs, we're lowering the amount of custom code, we're increasing essentially code quality by using predictable classes, we're shortening time to market, and we're enabling new types of experimentation. Our difficulty is turning that into a set of quantities, and that's what we're trying to do, is try to create an argument that isn't just take my word for it in some sense, but to measure it. So I think we have to put some measurements in place.
I hope that answered your question, Thomas.
Yeah, I hope so too.
Another anonymous, or maybe the same one. Any advice on implementing design systems or getting accepted by stakeholders who are unfamiliar with working in this way?
I think first you have to ask if a design system is the thing that you need. A design system is not for everybody. I have failed at implementing design systems, and I can't take credit. I inherited this one. I came into the team about 1.5 years ago, and it was already up and running. What I've been able to do is lead the team in a new direction, or push it in a new direction. They're already going somewhere. I think I can tell you from a failure point of view, if you don't have enough scale, a design system may be a lot of overhead for what you do. So it has to do with the number of products, the number of developers, the expression of your brand, the complexity that you're managing internally. So I think first, look up something like Design Checklist. I think which I think you'll find online. I'm not sure of the address, but if you search for Design Checklist, I think it's designchecklist.com or Design System Checklist. Sorry, Design System Checklist. You should find it. Arda will kill me if I don't know the URL. But what I will say is, first assess if a design system is for you. And then in terms of getting help, in terms of buy-in and adoption, start small. Don't build out a full-fledged system. Start with a small library, limited set of foundations and components, and demonstrate its value using your culture's testing methodology. It might be experimentation, and it might be some other way that you prove value within your culture.
Okay. Another one by Anonymous. In my limited experience, there has been a tension between developers who want to push out features ASAP and other team members who are focused on accessibility and want it done right. How do you negotiate and influence in those situations?
That's a great question. Well, I mean, part of our answer, and we're not there yet. I don't want to just beat my chest. We are trying hard to make our entire system accessible, and we're not there yet. And even that takes time. And we have to come up with a new way of working in order to do it, because as we're working on components 1, 2, 3, and 4, components 5, 6, and 7 are changing. So there's constant introduction of change, and that influences the way accessibility is engineered. And we're trying to learn that lesson right now. The typical answer to that is that accessibility is a huge legal compliance risk that has real dollars associated with it. And if your customers are coming to you, little over around 1% of our customers we know are using assistive technology, and that group is just because you support some aspects of accessibility doesn't mean you have a good accessible experience. And so I think you have to talk about what you and your company value. You have to talk about it from a risk perspective, and you have to talk about how you want to treat customers.
Excellent answer. Then we have a question by Simon Norris. He says, fantastic presentation, John. I love the deletions versus insertions visuals. So my question, what is the split approximately between research and improvement and production?
Research, improvement, and production. I'm not sure I totally understand that.
Okay, I'll ask Simon if you can just get into Q&A and
come back, Simon. Tell us what you mean.
Yeah, we'll ask another one in between. Another one from Iwire Owaka. He asked, has responding to COVID changed how your design team relates to marketing opportunities?
Well, I think our team is just like any other team, which is one day it sort of is shapeless and flows into the next, and we don't know what time it is, and we don't know if we're tired or hungry, and so I think COVID drives a lot of fatigue. But honestly, this is a group of high energy designers and developers who love interacting with communities. That's one of their primary drivers. They're constantly in Slack channels, and we use Facebook Workplace. They are basically the first responders on any front end issue, and whether that's design or development. I'm really proud of them for that. So I'm not sure COVID itself, though, has changed the way we design or what we're designing. I will tell you that it has made us think about we need good global messaging components, because we have a hard time telling our customers that there are COVID restrictions in their area. And so it would be really nice to have a design system. You know, we're looking now at componentizing global messaging, which we had not done up to this point. And one of our team members is doing that now.
Thank you so much for answering all the questions. Simon did not get back to us, so we'll make sure that his question gets to you. Exactly. It's time. So, John, I really want to thank you for this wonderful presentation and the time that you took for us during this last hour. Everyone, thank you very much for, yes, of course, John.
Can I just, one shout out. I got a lot of help from Tasia Pellegrini on my slides, and a chunk of the content in the middle by Alexei Drozdenko, representing the work of all the team. And I just wanted to thank two direct shout outs. And Arda, you already know how much you helped me. So yeah, 2 superstars. Okay, well, thank you very much. Our next talk will be at 4 p.m. Amsterdam time, 3 London time, which will be what we talk about when we talk about navigation. So everyone, thank you very much for attending. Hopefully you're back at 4. John, thank you very much, and go enjoy the sun. Bye. Thank you.